All right. Well, welcome to another episode of, I guess these fun videos with Interview At, where you will learn how to use the Amazon leadership principles in any job interview to land any role at any level, no matter what the company is. We focus on the Amazon leadership principles here because, quite frankly, it's a great way to deliver feedback. It's how Amazon, if you work at Amazon, it's how all feedback is delivered. But quite honestly, if I came up with Brandon's great, awesome, super amazing principles, I'd have to prove to you that they were worth a dang. And Amazon is worth, a lot of money. So I can just kind of point to it and go, I think they've done a pretty good job. Let's use those. So utilizing what I learned over my years running the Kindle team at Amazon, I focus on the leadership principles as a way to deliver feedback and drive the mock interviews that I do with candidates looking to land their dream job. If you would like to sign up for a mock interview, you can do so at interviewatt.com. I do these for free and I help people land their dream job. A little bit about me. I am an ex-Amazon, ex-Microsoft, ex-Oracle, ex-startup guy, ex-Wall Street. I've kind of done all the things, worked at a bunch of places, some companies you've probably never heard of, but most importantly, I was primarily a product manager, but have been a multidisciplinary manager and team lead, hired hundreds of people over the course of my multi-decade career. And now I run an advisory firm, but I make really cool content and help people land their dream jobs by doing mock interviews for free. It's my way of giving back. This specific candidate was targeting a mid-career product manager role at a very large FAANGM company. Well, that's to say very large, at a FAANGM company, right? Trying to up-level their position. And what was super interesting about this specific candidate is, if I recall correctly, they were a VP at their startup. And they were targeting, for those who understand the like Amazon-ish levels and the Microsoft-ish levels, an L6, kind of L63, 64 type job, right? And so, VPs don't generally target those jobs. And so there was a little bit that kind of came out of this, which was, I informed the candidate, I thought, based on the interview, that they were interviewing too low in the organization that they were targeting, and that might come up. Turns out it did, and they ended up having to reloop, which is interesting. So you'll kind of get a sense of that, where even though this person was interviewing for a much more junior role, they were much further along in their career. And look, it takes a lot of humility from someone who's willing to take that VP role, put it on a shelf, to kind of aim higher in their career. So that's just a little piece of advice and feedback for those of you who have a big title at a small company, what you might have to do to get a small title, but potentially much bigger role and opportunity at a much bigger company. This specific mock interview segment focused on delivered results. And in this question, I focused on restarts and pivots and kind of how they handle them. From time to time in these videos, I will also include love notes from the candidate. And in this case, this was the piece of the email I got about kind of what happened after the loop, and it was pretty interesting, which they said, basically, every person asked me about a time when I made a mistake or didn't deliver on something. I only had 3 examples of mistakes, which I just kept repeating. Your feedback doc specifically warned me about this. However, I didn't take enough of this into account, so I guess we'll see how it goes. Exclamation point. I do like the exclamation points. The point here is that the leadership principles are helpful for framing your answers. They're helpful for preparing your stories, but it's also helpful for highlighting where you have blind spots. And by blind spots, what I mean is if you're using the same story over and over again in an interview, especially when you have 6 or 7 in a day, if the company you're interviewing with has any reasonable kind of post-interview process where they get everybody together and they trade feedback, the fact that you use the same story over and over again will come up. It will hurt you because it's going to demonstrate that you have a very clear hole in your hole. That's my Austin Powers moment. You just don't have enough meat on the bone and you don't have enough breadth. You don't have enough scale. It's going to cause you problems when they do the candidate debrief and you're not in the room to defend yourself, of course, because you just didn't prepare enough stories and you kind of gave the same answers. They're just going to assume you haven't done anything because, again, remember, they're interviewing a bunch of candidates from a bunch of different places. They don't know you from a hole in the wall most of the time. And so they're going based on what you decided was your best foot forward. And if you had the same stories, well, it's a little bit rough for you to shine. So that was a piece of feedback here that I had given the candidate that turned out was a bit prophetic, and it's passing that along to anyone who's watching this video. You're going to want to prepare enough stories that you can kind of cover a breadth of answers and not get kind of shoved down a silo where you end up with only 2 or 3 answers. So with that, let's jump into the interview. Again, this is delivers results.
In our line of business, product managers, I think it's fair to say there's a lot of restarts and pivots from time to time. And so I'd like to talk about project, product, or even just, low-level feature work, whatever. Just pick whatever comes to mind. But where you were more than halfway there, in terms of completion of what it was you were trying to deliver, and realized you were on the wrong path. Whether that was because it was clear that you were on the wrong path because you just kind of made bad decisions, or because there were some new unintended consequences that hadn't been thought through, or that were surfacing that were potentially knowable, but largely unknowable. Pick one and let's just talk about what was the situation. What did you do?
So two things here. One, if you find this content useful or helpful, please go ahead and like the video or subscribe to the channel. I'll be completely honest with you. It makes me feel really good when I get the emails from YouTube that says, hey, somebody left you a comment. It makes me feel like, oh, cool, I helped somebody today. So go ahead and do that. I definitely appreciate it. Two, here's why I asked this question and why I asked it this specific way. As a product leader, especially a mid-level product leader and beyond, there's a huge difference between goal attainment and the right goal attainment. Do you understand the difference? That's what I'm trying to get at with this question without specifically stating it that way. I asked, you got more than halfway there and you had to change, you had to pivot. Why? But do they understand why? And was it about goal attainment or the right goal attainment?
But again, the focus is on something where you were, halfway is a general guidepost, but more than halfway there, and then had to make a decision to stop and do something else.
Okay. I have a scenario that I'm thinking of that we were on the wrong path, and realized that halfway through, and I continued.
Okay, let's have that conversation. That'll be interesting.
Sure. So we were, so similar business, working at Pillow, leading the product team. We had an application for our vendors, our independent contractors in the market, and then we had a web app for our owners. And we didn't have any technology for the guests, right? They had.
Just to jump in and help out people here, because this has been covered previously in the interview. She talked about the candidate had talked about this app. This company was basically a web application service for rental property owners that participate in like Airbnb, right? So it was a SaaS offering for those property owners.
Had a website where they could access some information about their vacation rental, but no app. And the information on the web app was sort of incomplete, and it wasn't a great experience. And so we revamped the web app to improve the experience. One of the major things we were focused on is reducing the number of reservations that experienced a lockout, where they weren't able to get into the vacation rental. And so that was the primary focus of our redesign of the guest interface. As part of that, we also wanted to release a mobile app, in part because, our guests were on the go, right? So they were checking into a vacation rental on vacation, and we wanted to ensure that they had an experience that would make it easy for them to access their vacation rental. And then we also had mechanisms for supporting them throughout the reservation that we thought would be a better experience to navigate in an app itself. And we had also committed to investors and our board that we were going to release an app in, I think it was in Q1 of that year.
Okay, we are now 3 or 4 minutes into this preamble. A great answer, especially using the STAR format, which I definitely advocate for. Right, your situation task, your setup, your act 1 of your answer. You need to get to the point faster. You just need to what are the stakes? What were you doing for whom? Why? Right, get to the stakes. But the stakes here haven't been established. There's no clear objective truths or falsehoods which can be challenged. There's no metrics. It's really hard to understand even what had been done to this point. What's the pivot that's necessary? So there's a lot of preamble here, which is going to start weighing down on the interviewer, right? So if you think about who you're interviewing with, especially if they're doing a full day of interviews where they're bringing in more than one candidate, man, those people get tired. It's a rough day. If you've never done a full slate where you're basically doing interview after interview, it can get exhausting. And trying to keep up the mental strength to keep up in an answer where you're trying to track, but the candidate's not being super clear, it can be tough. So crispness in the delivery of your answer and your setup just has to be better.
Halfway through the project, basically, thinking through the user experience, I did think it was important for them to be able to access this information on the go. But it didn't necessarily need to occur in a native application. There was some wins there that were important, like, being able to store the data locally on the phone so that if they didn't have access to Wi-Fi, then they would still be able to access it. But it became clear that, that those were edge cases for the customer and that the whole, building it as an application in and of itself was not an efficient use of engineering resources. So what we should have done is release with only the web app and then determine if our growth in reservations resulted in it being necessary to launch the mobile app. But what we did is instead launch the mobile app as a fast follow. I'm sorry.
So you're saying that the decision point was whether or not to release the mobile app with data versus just a fast follow.
Right.
Okay.
So I've run a bunch of product teams. I've done a few things. I was confused by this answer. It was really hard for me to follow what the exact decision was. Again, like I said in the earlier jump in, there was too much preamble here, which caused me as an interviewer, even listening to the answer again, which I haven't watched this video for maybe, 6-7 months. It's been a while since I've seen this video. It's very hard to follow and understand what the path was, why, who was involved, what decision was actually made, what action was taken, and what happened. So there's a level of crispness that did not happen here that ultimately impedes on my ability as the interviewer to ask good follow-on questions and probe on certain things, because I'm the cognitive load of trying to figure out, well, what did I miss something? Did she say something I didn't? It shouldn't be this hard. And again, I thought this candidate was amazing, so I'll kind of jump to the end on that. But there were definitely parts of the interview where she struggled, and this was one of them.
Yeah. So we were more than halfway into developing the mobile app. We were more than halfway done. It was we just completed it and got it into the App Store. It was approved very quickly. And we had a mobile app, but it turns out that during that time of development, we realized that the web app was more than sufficient for guests to be using, and they weren't getting a huge amount of additional value from the web app or the mobile app because the web app was solving 98% of their problems.
So let's kind of do a better job of answering the question, right? Having now watched this back again and doing this in real time, but also remembering back to when we spoke, right? The key problem here as a product leader was that there was a divergence between the web app that existed in a web browser, tablet, computer, whatever, and their mobile web experience, right? There was a divergence in the feature set and the capabilities. They wanted to improve upon that experience, make it better. And so the thought process was, we'll build an app instead of why don't we just get the experiences to marry up a little bit better. And without that level of clarity and just speaking about the answer, it was really tough to stitch together what the actual problem was and where the decision point needed to be made. And ultimately where the candidate got to, and it's not super clear. So you kind of have to suss it out a little bit. And she's creating work for the interviewer, which is not always a good thing. Because the interviewer's tired, they haven't eaten food that day, if they're just having a bad day, right? Once you start creating work for them, it's just, again, you're leaving it to them to have a favorable opinion of you. That's what interviews are. a better setup would have allowed for follow-on questions like, okay, what was the delta in those experiences? What were customers complaining about? How did you know that this was a problem? How was that feedback? I mean, all these are follow-on questions I would have loved to have asked, but it took too long to get there. And in the constrained time that a person has with you, they may not get to it. And that's frustrating. So she's not ultimately, as a candidate, putting her best foot forward because we can't have a rich conversation about a smart decision that she may or may not have made. Rather, spend a bunch of time on preamble and me as an interviewer trying to understand and stitch this all together because of the lack of clarity and the too many words problem.
Okay, so in that fast follow model, though, in that window, or I guess even not, right? You kind of do your release. How are you guys defining success or failure of the project?
Okay, so I'm going to cheat here a little bit and just jump in. Look, if you get asked that question in an interview, it means you have failed to demonstrate that you've made a good decision, right? Because it should be like, as an interviewer, I shouldn't have to ask you, how do you know if you're succeeding or failing? That should be table stakes for how you answer your question. Always make it clear that you knew going into it that you are going to know how you were being successful or failing based on X. And here's how we measured X. And here's how we got the reports on X. And here's how we knew. And here's how often we were monitoring it. Right? If you're not doing that, it's going to be a tough sell, especially for the company that she was targeting. We
are defining success of the revisions to the interface of reducing customer support requests and reducing the occurrence of this particular incident of lockout. But we had to achieve that with the web app. And so there weren't specific metrics associated to the mobile app other than sort of general engagement and then the ability to initiate like additional kind of add-ons to the reservation that made the company, incremental revenue.
Yeah, so she started strong. A better answer would have been customer support costs are calculated as the amount of time our CSRs are having to spend on these specific issues, prioritized by bucket, whatever. We pay them X number of dollars a year. So every one of these inbound customer support requests is costing us blah dollars, right? That's part one. Part two is the reduction in the number of incidents of this type, this specific lockout request type. What happened? Like she kind of lays out the metrics for success and then she doesn't actually go into, were they successful? That was the question. How do you know if you're successful? Well, we had these metrics. So again, for you as the person watching this, trying to learn from mock interviews, that's your opportunity, right? You are sitting across from somebody who wants you to be good because they don't want to do 100 interviews. They want you to be good. So one of the ways to be good is to demonstrate that what you do is repeatable and that you know how to do your job and that you know how to communicate within an organization, you know how to set yourself up and your teams for success, you know how to set goals, you know how to set the right goals, and you know how to measure those things so that ultimately long-term you're trending down a path towards success. That should all be part of your answer. Metrics matter.
Those were also supported in the web app, so it wasn't necessary to do it in a native application.
So I guess this will be a two-part question. So you do the fast follow, you release the mobile app, but you didn't have clear objective metrics as to success or failure of that specific SKU versus the mobile web app SKU, right? So I guess let's just ask the first question. What did you then decide to do about the mobile app and over what time period? What did you guys do with that?
It certainly was deprioritized with regard to development. Also, just because we can make improvements on the web app so much more quickly. We developed it with, I'm blanking on the moment, but so we are also able to get some of those improvements into the web app without having to do a new app store approval and release. Yep. So actually the company was a startup and they, within 6 months of releasing the mobile app, they actually pivoted to focus more on B2B than B2C. Okay. And so the mobile app became even more not necessary at that point because they were really making products for people who were renting out like full apartment buildings on Airbnb at that point. And so they were more focused on the sort of owner interface that gave them visibility into management.
Okay, that makes sense. I am not going to ask that next question because it does.
Okay. So I pre-script all of my interviews. It makes it easier for me to take notes, and I bailed on the last question. So that was the end of that segment. Ultimately, this answer, as presented, bordered on a miss for our write-a-lot, because it ultimately didn't deliver on the promise of delivers results. I don't know that the candidate was successful here. They didn't have metrics for success. It wasn't laid out in a framework that was easily understandable. As an interviewer, again, had never met this person before. As an interviewer, you're meeting with them for 45 minutes to an hour. You've maybe got their resume and LinkedIn. Like, there's not a lot to go on. So you're trying to figure out the best picture of, will this person be successful here? And so absent the clarity around the what, the clarity around the why, it makes it very hard, because those are two things as a product manager you must know: what and why. You're doing a thing, you're building a thing, etc. It makes it very hard to understand if the fact that they made the decision to abandon the app quickly based on the needs were adequately addressed by just reswizzling the web interface into the web app. Is that bad planning, which is a product manager type miss? Is that a lack of kind of, depth of field around the difference between mobile apps and web apps? Unclear if that lack of expertise was on hand. So ultimately what happens is this candidate, who, again, across the entirety of the interview did a phenomenal job. I mean, I wanted to hire this person on the spot. I told them, hey, listen, if I can help you, let me help you, because I thought they would just make a really good product manager. But in this specific leadership principle question block, too much was left in the hands of the judges, right? Me being one of the judges, right? So you don't want to do that. You don't want the interviewer walking out of the room with too many questions unanswered, wondering if what you did is repeatable, if you even understand what you did was right or wrong. Because when you leave it to their subjective judgment, as opposed to objective truths, which is based on these metrics, and here's our success factors. When it's subjective judgment, yikes. There's a lot of things that can work as headwinds for you as the candidate when the interviewer is walking out of that room and has to make subjective judgments based on a lack of information that you provided. That's rough, and you don't want to do that. And so I would say that based on other answers as a candidate given, clearly delivers results. Back up the truck, the results are falling onto the back of the truck, which really helped spotlight this as an area of concern for this candidate in terms of how they were presenting their stories, and quite frankly, how they were structuring their stories. I'll have other content that you can find in my channel about structure and storytelling. But in this specific instance, this is a great example of just didn't do a great job in structuring the answer. Star format is just a great way to do it. There's plenty of other ways to structure your answers, but there just wasn't great structure. The metrics were unclear. Very hard to know if they were successful. Unclear to know if this was repeatable within an organization. What lesson did she take away from this that she would apply elsewhere in her career? Just too many questions. Makes it really, really hard. So that wraps up this specific mock interview segment on delivers results, mid-career product manager, and have a good one.